A golden sunset was spreading over the 50th district, barely breaking through the clouds. Children with bags and backpacks were digging through piles of scrap metal and running somewhere. Suddenly, something caught the attention of the two grimy boys, forcing them to look up from the trash. A golem, created from a pile of stones and moving with surprising dexterity, was approaching them. A boy shouted, attracting the golem's attention and waving a flashlight. He was sure that this strange creature would take the offering and give food in return. The golem leaned over, examining the lantern. No one knew where it came from, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was the opportunity to get food in exchange for trash. However, this did not always work. And now the golem turned away and left indifferently. The children shouted angrily after him, one holding the other back from attacking, reminding him that there was a risk of getting hit in return. One of the boys did not participate in either the garbage collection or the dialogue. He jumped off the pile of scrap metal he was sitting on and headed straight towards the golem. His bag was full of trash and he seemed quite confident in his offering. The golem's eye glowed red, showing lust. The creature opened its mouth wide, took the bag and shook everything out into it without sorting it out, as if every piece of iron suited it. The boys were amazed. Why did the golem take so much? And where did this boy get so many suitable things again? The boy held out his bag and fresh food poured into it. Such a food supply could last for 3 days, and the boys even thought about taking the bag of food from him. But they stopped themselves. This is the ghost of 17th Street. The ghost himself walked calmly along his path, although he knew perfectly well that 7 people were following him, who were not afraid of him. It was a crowd led by a fat boy with a missing tooth. The boy's name was Ron, and he had already been warned that if Ray, the ghost, ever saw him again, he would make sure that the man would never be able to walk again. However, he didn't seem to be afraid. He told me to put the bag on the floor and then leave calmly. The desire to get the food was stronger than the fear. Ray knew for sure that this man was lying. The local kids used to say, "Don't look the ghost of 17th Street in the eye, or all your lies will come out." Ron was not willing to admit that he was lying. The best argument seemed to be the brass knuckles. Ray didn't even try to attack back. He simply stepped aside and tripped him, letting his momentum do the work for him. Only after that did he hit the guy in the chest. The rest of the gang grinned angrily. What the hell is he doing? Together they rushed at Ray. Couldn't a mob with bats defeat one skinny kid? The most zealous one flew back with a broken nose, frightening the others. The others got hit, some with a knee, some with a fist, some with their own weapons. It doesn't matter how many people attack him. They all end up face down on the ground. Ron, having come to his senses, crawled back, trembling all over and demanding that they not come closer. Get away. Leave him alone. He pulled out a knife when Ray reminded him of his promise to make him unable to walk. Ron called him a monster, and perhaps he was right. Ghost or monster, it didn't make much difference. Ray probably realized at the age of 10 that he was different from other people. He fell, scraping his knees until they bled. The other children were puzzled. Why wasn't he crying? But why should he cry from pain? A friend was attacked by kids from another street. Why isn't he angry? Why should he be angry? One of the friends died. Why are there no tears on his face? But should there be any? Ray scared the children, and gradually his entire entourage dispersed. Then the boy realized that he did not experience what people call emotions. He reached out his hand to the stars, asking them to make him like the others. Even now, 6 years later, he still felt nothing, but he had learned to read the emotions of others. And now, Ray said indifferently that blades cannot be used in fights, and Ron knew this very well. He probably wanted to stab his opponent from the very beginning. Ron denied it, but the vessel in his chest was filled with black. He was lying. Ray had no emotions, but he had seen these vessels inside people. When someone experienced something, this container would fill with the contents, mana, which had different colors. Joy and inspiration are yellow, mockery and despair are blue, anger, hatred, love are red, and there are many other colors that paint Ray's world. The guy slowly advanced towards Ron, who was trembling with fear. Ray stretched his hand over his opponent. The liar must be punished for his lies and for his cowardice. Having dealt with the gang, the young man went home. It seemed that his goal was a gray concrete box. However, it turned out that the box had an entrance, and behind it, Children and Pale, the leader of the Children of the Underground Passages, were waiting for Ray. The kids happily hung on the young man, although he did not express much enthusiasm. Everyone sat down in a circle to share equally what they had managed to get today. Everyone bent over a few coins and a couple of chocolates, intrigued and worried. Would it be possible to divide it among everyone? Ray silently took the bag off his shoulder. He was obviously the group's main breadwinner. The children looked at him with delighted smiles. How did he manage to save so much? Great. In fact, Ray knew that the golem only took magical items with residual mana. If you can't see the mana, the chance of getting the desired item is very low. Pale told the children to line up so that everyone could get their share. Thanks to their big brother, they wouldn't go hungry today. Ray was sitting outside at that moment, looking at the rain and thinking that there was still not enough food for everyone. It is his duty to support this group. He owes his life to the children of the underworld. A year ago, they found him in the snow, almost frozen, and pulled him out. In general, he didn't mind dying, but the rescue had taken place, and now it was Ray's duty to repay this debt. In general, he considered himself obliged to repay all debts, both good and bad. In his mind, help and revenge went hand in hand. Pale appeared from under the awning, calling to his older brother to get his share as well. Ray tried to deny his desire to eat, although the loud rumbling in his stomach contradicted his words. So Pale broke the bar and handed half to his friend. They talked about black rain. Rumor had it that the rain turned black when mages used too much magic. Almost all the mages lived in sectors with lower numbers, more prestigious, and well-fed. Probably the golem was also sent by mages, although, of course, it could have been a simple machine. Pale looked dreamily at the sky. He was sure that the golem was driven by magic. In fact, Ray agreed with Pale because when the golem moved, it attracted mana, which mixed in it and was released as black gas. Anyway, something else was more important now. Ray was about to go out into the black rain. He had things to do. Pale tried to stop him, but the young man didn't care about any such attempts. He always did whatever he wanted. Ray ran confidently through the rain, although many believed that one drop of it could make a person sick. But he could protect himself from the rain, so the work was easier than many. The destination was Lame Hector's grocery store on 18th Street. The workers, as always in the rain, were gambling, making penetration an easy task. The young man crawled first under the fence and then into the hole in the foundation. It was dark inside, and the air was filled with hundreds of different types of mana. By attracting certain ones and mixing them, light could be created. Although Ray didn't know the exact methods, this method worked quite well, and a light flashed in the boy's hand. Red mana was the hardest to control. Just as Ray was thinking about the reasons for this, a steel blade flew towards him. He noticed this in time and was able to turn the dagger in the air, sending it towards its owner. It seems the workers were originally in the warehouse, shouting that a small rat had no right to cut their rations. Those three knew the exact location of the thief. They had good equipment, in particular, night vision goggles. All their daggers flew right on target. Well, if that's the case, why not take advantage of the opportunity? Ray jumped up and ran, leaning directly on the blades. The guard recoiled in horror, now rather disappointed by the night vision goggles. Perhaps he would have preferred not to see this. Before he could even scream, Ray had already knocked him unconscious with a blow. The other guards were shocked by this, and by the fact that the boy had seen them. And he was focusing not so much on the bodies as on the vessels filled with glowing red fury. The young man easily dodged the blows. By monitoring the flow of mana, he could predict the guard's actions and did so in a matter of seconds. Next step is a kick to the face, then a hand to the stomach. And now 3 guards are lying on the concrete floor, unable to protect the warehouse or even themselves. Then the gate swung open. The big man didn't even bother to touch the handle. He kicked it with his foot so that the doors hit the walls. This man is a member of Hector's band, Gumpri. He was probably attracted by the noise. The man was quite impressed. It was amazing how this little rat managed to deal with 3 brothers at once. Well, he really was as scary as the rumors said. I had to get out of the warehouse. The best defense was a good offense, so Ray immediately hit the man in the chest. Surprisingly, he didn't even move. Okay, let's try something else. But before Ray could attack again, the man had already reached out his hand towards him, trying to literally sweep the boy out of the way. He managed to jump back in time, at the same time assessing the speed of his opponent. This man was definitely on another level. Not expecting a new attack, the man raised his hand for another blow. Ray dodged again and again. He instinctively knew that he couldn't defeat this man. So we need to aim at open points while we still have the opportunity. Ray concentrated mana in his hand, turning it into flame, trying to strike while he had the chance. Gampri grabbed his chest in surprise where the blow had landed and stared at the place where his opponent had just been. Ray hurried to hide at that moment. The group members were already scattered around the area trying to find him, and it was clear that it was only a matter of time. The young man made a nearby iron shield make a soft sound, attracting the attention of the guards, and rushed in the opposite direction. He searched Hector's group's warehouse. If they find him, they'll definitely kill him. In fact, Ray, then as now, was not afraid of death. But if he dies, those children won't be able to feed themselves. They won't last long on their own. Up until now, this company has been held together mainly by Ray. Just as the boy paused to catch his breath while thinking about this, the voice of one of Hector's group members was heard from behind. They caught up with Ray, too, and that's the minimum. The boy was fast, but fate had it that he ran into a dead end. There was nowhere else to run. The guard grinned mockingly. He'd better come closer and return the stolen goods, otherwise there'll be a hole in his stomach. Among these people, Ray did not see Gumpri, so he had a chance to win. The young man felt confident and was able to quickly intercept the first attacker. Looking in surprise at how the fragile boy was holding his wrist, the guard couldn't help but comment out loud on the surprising strength for such a frail child. He noticed this at the wrong time. A short delay allowed Ray to deliver a blow. A few seconds later, both guards were unconscious. This did not bring relief. The noise attracted the attention of other members of the group, and it became clear that they would not be able to cope with everyone. Then Ray noticed a trash can standing nearby. The guards barely lingered, not paying attention to the inconspicuous dirty courtyard. Lying among the garbage bags, Ray thought it would be safer to stay there until morning. After all, he couldn't even go back. That might lead the pursuers to the group of children. Without noticing it, the boy fell asleep right in the trash can. He was woken up by sunlight. He thought that no one would keep watch for that long and confidently jumped out. However, a voice that came from nearby suggested that his confidence was in vain. One of the members of Gampri's group decided to return, and for some reason here, he had a knife hidden behind his back. Every shade of red was seething in his chest. Fury, searing and strong, as if Ray had personally offended this man. And the boy had not yet fully recovered. He held out his knife, and taking this as an invitation to fight, the guard rushed into the attack, confident that he would not have to hold back. Ray barely managed to dodge the blade that could have split his face in half. The boy's face reflected horror. He slipped and almost fell, and this would have been tantamount to death. The knife almost went into his eye socket. Ray's face was covered in blood. Although if his eye had been gouged out, the blood would have flowed differently. It was the worker's blood. The bullet hit him in the head, and his body fell limply next to the boy. The man who fired the bullet grinned smugly. He took out a cigarette and a lighter. This man obviously knew Ray and seemed completely calm. What's all this fuss about so early in the morning, huh? It was Niels, the boss of 17th Street. Usually at this time he was still asleep, but today he heard in time that the guys from Hector's group were looking for someone and decided to come to the rescue. He noticed the cans that Ray kept in his bosom. Not bad. It's not that easy to steal something from a warehouse. He's just nuts. Ray decided to take it as a compliment. The vessel in Neil's chest was filled with a grayish mist, and people with such vessels were not easy to deal with. His emotions were so monotonous that the vessel was never completely filled, making it even harder for him to understand Ray's desire to sacrifice himself for his children. It doesn't matter, though. Now Niels has returned the favor for saving him. Ray had once fished him out of the river. He hadn't planned to save the man at all. He'd simply mistaken his wet back for a bag of supplies, and he was already paying for that incident. At that time, Niels was the executor of the 46th sector, but he was betrayed. As payment for saving him, he taught Ray how to fight and a few other things, and the lessons were fairly structured. He was here at just the right time, and not only because of the help, but also because Ray had something to say about joining his organization. He would like to do this. Then there will be a better chance that the children will be safe. Niels chuckled strangely and walked around the corner, lighting a new cigarette. Out of nowhere, he asked if Ray could use magic, causing him to flinch in horror. Of course, Niels noticed this reaction and drew the right conclusions. And he already thought that it was hallucinations when the boy made a fire without matches. In any case, it was an opportunity to learn more about magic. Ray immediately pestered Niels to tell him about the flowers. Had their mage from the previous organization mentioned anything about them? But no, that man didn't talk about any flowers. What does Ray see then? He assumed that such a small amount of information was due to Niels's poor memory, and immediately dodged the joking blow. They returned to the conversation about the organization. Not so much returned as almost finished it. The boss of the 17th Street refused to take the younger comrade. He said that if you move upstream along the river, along which the sectors are located, you can find a better life. It would be too great a waste to allow a child with such abilities to be left to perish in the slums of the 50th district. Why not try? Niels was even willing to provide a car. Ray wouldn't even have to worry about children. The man planned to found an orphanage in the future. The colors in his vessel were very faded, but it was unlikely that he was lying now. Besides, Niels always kept his word. There was, however, an obstacle. It seems that Hector is preparing for war. Entire trucks loaded with weapons arrived at his warehouses. What was especially important was that it was a firearm. And every shot meant a public declaration of war. Ray looked at his interlocutor thoughtfully. What was the worry? He had thought that the organization on 17th Street had more resources and would be able to protect the people there. Besides, at his age, it was time to think ahead. Niels snorted angrily. He's not that old, he's not even married. The man waved his hand again, but he had a worthy student. He dodged again. A car pulled up and the girl behind the wheel hurried Niels. Finally, he advised leaving this area, because soon there would be a real battlefield here, and threw something to Ray. It was antiseptic. The guy had a wound on his ear that needed to be treated. With that, the car sped away. Ray headed towards the children of the underground passages, but first he looked in on old lady Viola. The girl happily jumped up to meet him. Why didn't her older brother come back yesterday? And why was he so shabby? Was he fighting? He must be in pain. Tears appeared in the child's eyes. It was incredible how a person could feel so many emotions at once. Consoling the girl, Ray patted her head and gave her the canned food. Let her give it to Pale and not worry about anything. Now the boy turned to Viola to find out what she had just told the child. She smiled. Nothing special, just about the rainbow. Ray sighed. Don't tell the kids about this. If they get used to talking about fantasies, they probably won't be able to cope with street life. The blind storyteller believed that children were the ones who should listen to and remember such stories. She was surrounded by purple mana. Ray had never seen such a thing in anyone except Viola. He did not know this emotion. As he left, he threw over his shoulder that the old woman should go to another street, because a war would soon begin on this one. She smiled after him. What a kind young man. The next morning, Ray made the delivery. The man was surprised. He thought it was Ron's job. The guy just shrugged and asked if the merchant himself was going to leave this place. With the start of the war, there would definitely be no visitors. The man pointed to the door. Hector and Niels were talking there. If everything went well, there might not be a war. The door swung open and 3 people came out. The one whose face was crossed with a scar was Hector himself, the boss of 18th Street. He looked at Ray in surprise. A child, and he works? And in a place where all the adults had fled. He patted the boy on the neck. Well done, let him keep trying. Only then can one survive in this world. A few silver coins fell into the boy's hand. Let him treat himself to something. Everyone moved towards the exit. Gumpry looked closely at Ray and noticed the bandage on his ear. Before the man could take a closer look, the boy pulled his hood down further, and there was no time to stop. Hector was impatiently calling him to follow him. The shop owner breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, they had left. Ray took off his hood. He was sure that Gumpry recognized him, but why did he leave without saying anything? Niels, sitting in a small box, was nervously smoking again. The negotiations have failed. War is destined to happen. The merchant swallowed in fear. How could this be? What should they do now? Niels looked away. He couldn't accept such an absurd condition as a complete takeover of their organization. That would really be the worst outcome. Ray left. Walking down the street, he thought that soon he would not be able to walk around like this anymore. And he needed to find as much food as possible before the war began. At the intersection, he crossed paths with a black car. Gumpry was driving, and there had never been a car like that in Sector 50. Ray covered his face with his sweater just in case. He was heading towards the entrance to Hector's group's base, following the car. Fortunately, it wasn't that far. Hector himself was standing next to the doors in a very respectful pose. The door opened and out came a man with a monocle and a cane, who was respectfully addressed as Mr. Magician. His aura was blue-black, a similar light that golems emitted when they moved. And there were some rings around this vessel. Ray had never seen anything like that before. There was also a lot of mana around these rings. It was as if the magician used these rings to limit his energy. This man is clearly dangerous. Niels must be told about him. Niels's base was bustling with life. His men were moving boxes, shouting to each other, clearly preparing for war. Ray approached the red-haired man, asking where Niels had gone. He waved his hand. The boss had left. His training clearly did not consist of dragging supplies. Then perhaps Ray had something to convey through this man. He told them to tell the boss that they should all beware of the man with the monocle. Ray returned to Pale's hideout, and while the other children slept, they sat outside together and talked about how the war must be over soon. The two groups were almost equal, but Niels had to win simply for the safety of the children. If Hector wins this war, they will simply be sold into slavery. Suddenly there was a strange, unnatural, loud sound. Something was clearly wrong. Nothing like this had ever happened in these parts before. On 17th Street, Niels's men desperately fired back with continuous bursts of machine gun fire. However, no matter how much they shot, it had no effect. The same golem that had previously accepted garbage in exchange for food was approaching them. And most importantly, after such an intense shelling, there was not a scratch on it. The golem raised its hand and a black and blue beam of mana shot out from it. One of the shooters who took the brunt of the blow died instantly. The second lost his balance and fell nearby, hit but alive. It seemed that he would not be alive for long. The golem extended its huge stone hand towards him. The young man's body was squeezed in a hard palm and crushed, blood splashing onto the magical creature. The same magician with the monocle was watching from the side. The only thing that worried him about the death of these people was that now, in his opinion, it smelled like slop. He extended his hand over the surrounding areas and commanded the golem to clear everything here. Meanwhile, the strange sound was approaching the children's shelter, and Ray was not going to sit silently and wait for what it would bring with it. Pale was eager to go with him, but the boy confidently told him to wait here. Then one of the children came outside, awakened by the noise. Pale was distracted, comforting him, advising him to return to the tent quickly, and assuring him that they would also be arriving soon. Then he turned back to Ray and nodded. Yes, he should stay with the children. But the comrade should return as soon as possible and not expose himself to danger. However, danger found the guy itself. He returned to where he met Niels' people and found their corpses and the area engulfed in flames. Looking at the red-haired man sitting with difficulty, he couldn't believe his eyes. Just now, less than an hour ago, everything was fine with these people in these houses. The man turned out to be alive. He croaked that Hector's men had brought a golem with them, and they had no chance of winning, and, as it turned out, never had. He fell, his hand falling to the ground. His last words were about a man with a monocle and the need to run as far as possible. All Ray could do for him now was lean over and cover the dead man's eyes so that they wouldn't stare blankly at the nightmare unfolding around them. Ray drew his blade, preparing for surprise attacks. At this rate, Niels' group would lose. He had to help. At the same time, on the bridge where the Pale Children's tent was, something terrible was happening under the black rain. Dead, bloody children lay one on top of the other, caught in their sleep. Pale himself was still alive, clutching the body of another child, one of the younger ones in the group. But his status as a living person did not last long. The frighteningly merciless golem had already extended its hand towards him, with a clot of black-blue mana instead of a palm. Pale closed his eyes, accepting death. The last thing he thought was that Ray must never return. Ray had not returned yet. The realization that he was too late and all these people were now dead washed over him in waves. However, among all these people, Niels himself was not there. Perhaps he is still alive? Suddenly, Ray heard the same sound that he and Pale had heard while sitting by the tent. Only this time the sound came from the bridge. The guy jumped up and rushed there. If he didn't make it back in time, there were children there. He didn't make it in time again. There were black rain puddles under his feet and bloody stains under the golem's feet. Nothing remained of the tent with the children except a trace on the asphalt. Ray felt something inside him tighten, snap, break, and freeze. This just couldn't be happening. But deceiving himself was not in the habit of this young man, but attacking first and quickly was. The attack failed. The golem noticed him and intercepted him in mid-jump. Knocking the wind out of him, he threw Ray against the wall, his back crushing the poor quality material. All he could think about at that moment was whether the children were okay. A stupid, naive hope. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice calling him to it. Surrounded by a transparent light, several children ran towards Ray. They were all healthy and seemed happy. And most importantly, they were all alive. Only Pale looked at him, arms crossed over his chest, though smiling. He said mercilessly that he didn't want to see Ray here. The sweet illusion was shattered. Before Ray's eyes were corpses, dead, bloody children, and Pale hugging the youngest of them. Lauren, Leia, Corden, Miles. Everyone was killed. Ray reached out a trembling hand to their bodies. No, He hadn't yet repaid them for everything they had done for him. The boy reached out to the children, unable to even get up from the ground, and the golem stood nearby and could have watched if he had been alive. But he wasn't looking. He was going to continue cleaning up the trash. With the same sound that Ray and Pale had heard, the killing mana was being concentrated in his hand. So it was the golem. He killed them all. The children, Niels's people, all the other people on the street. Ray shuddered with hatred. He must take revenge. However, before he could force his pain-ridden body to move, a car crashed into the golem. The monstrous creature was thrown aside, but the car remained intact. Niels jumped out of it, terribly afraid for Ray. He rushed to the boy and felt him. It seemed he hadn't even broken any bones. What a relief. But the bones didn't seem to be the most important thing right now. The children. Niels rose to his feet. It was as if he was not afraid of the black rain, because the knowledge that if he had arrived a little earlier, the whole group would be alive, was more frightening than any black downpour. Tears ran down Ray's cheeks, also black for some reason. Why would Niels be to blame for what happened? The man first looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, and then fell to his knees, hugging him. A couple of minutes later, Niels was already telling Ray that all his people were dead. And the reason for that was a magician from another sector. The one with the monocle. Now the only thing left for him to do was go back outside and look for survivors, and then Ray never knew what Niels wanted to do next. A beam of black and blue mana struck him in the chest, passing right through him. The golem rose to its feet again and struck again. Niels lowered his head and looked in surprise at the hole left in him, crumbling and like a bite from the void. Only then did he stagger and fall into Ray's arms, maintaining a surprised expression on his face. Suddenly, Ray felt something new, as if his heart was really beating for the first time in 16 years. He remembered how Niels taught him to fight, how they ate buns together, hard-earned, and therefore especially delicious. Ordinary moments that had never surfaced in memory before. It was the moment when Ray's heart was filled to the brim with red-hot mana. He looked down at the golem, no longer its victim, but its shining red antipode. The young man bared his teeth. They took away the most precious thing from him. And now this golem really thinks it has the right to attack? Ray raised his hand, countering the golem's blow with his own red-hot mana. The forces collided, creating a flash and burning away everything that remained nearby. It was reflected in Ray's eyes. At that moment, he was not thinking about death or the future. He thought that he did have emotions after all. The red Nikonets overpowered the blue, and the golem was engulfed in a furious flame that was capable of melting the stone. A trench filled with red-hot earth stretched from the boy to the monster. Paying no more attention to his opponent, Ray rushed towards Niels. No, he can't die. Let him wake up, please. If he dies, then he will have no one left. Niels actually spoke up, telling them to stop shaking him and not make the pain worse. Although he was sure that he would not see a peaceful death, he still did not think that he would die that day. He had no regrets. The man had done a lot for someone who started out as a pathetic scavenger. But if he had started trying a little earlier, maybe things would have turned out differently. Yes, about Ray's age. Now Niels gathered his last strength to smile at the boy and ask him to leave as soon as possible. Let his little brother swim up the river. He is one of those who can do it. And be careful on the rapids. He'll cope. He'll cope. Niels' hand unclenched and fell. Rage and despair were the first emotions that Ray experienced in his life. When Ray woke up the next morning, he felt pain in his numb arm. Belatedly, memories of what happened yesterday came to him. And at the mere thought of it, all the emotions of yesterday also rose up in him like fire. Something was definitely wrong. A controlled small fire flared up in his palm. The stronger the emotion, the bigger it became. Suddenly a pain shot through my temple and the flame went out. It seemed I had overdone it. He knew he had to leave. But before he did, Ray stood up and laid out all the bodies in a row, then covered the children with a sheet. The central square on 17th Street was cleared of corpses. People whispered that things would get more difficult with Hector's victory, and told each other to be quiet so that they wouldn't be killed by people from his group. Hector himself, perhaps, even regretted this turn of events. If Niels had listened to him. Well, it wasn't meant to be then. Excellent. Ray found those he was looking for. Then a large male hand fell on his shoulder. Ray turns around, swinging his knife sharply and nearly slitting his opponent's throat. He steps back so only his turtleneck gets caught in the knife. It was Gumpry. Here they were again, facing each other. All Ray could think about at that moment was that Hector's entire group had to die. Gumpry himself stared at the boy in horror. What a sudden change. Before he was neither so strong nor so fast, nor especially so furious. It wouldn't take long to lose. So Gumpry decided to take the blow himself. Ray's face showed unmistakable surprise. What had this man just done? What was his purpose? This momentary hesitation gave the man the opportunity to grab the fragile boy and throw him to the ground, knocking the wind out of him. Holding him down, Gumpry insisted that the famous ghost of 17th Street should not die for something as stupid as revenge. Actually, he has a proposal. The man helped the boy up and asked him to listen. Interesting. The silent Gumpry, known for doing his job silently and efficiently, is now offering something to a person actually from the opposing group, and the expression on his face is absolutely desperate. It looks like he's not going to lie. Ray decided to listen. It turned out that Gumpry needed the guy to leave the 50th sector. He left and found his younger brother, whom Hector had sold to the City of Magicians. It turned out that Hector had promised to reveal his location if Gumpry worked for him for 10 years. The brother should be about Ray's age now. The man asks him about this because he is almost certain that Ray can use magic. After the battle in the warehouse, he is sure of it. He is also sure that Hector cannot be defeated now. There is always a terrible magician next to him. This man is a demon. In Gumpry's chest, a blue-black mana accumulated, indicating a trembling fear. It turned out that anyone who contradicts the magician is immediately frozen. And once he drowned a guy by placing his head in a bubble of water. Under these conditions, Ray should leave this place and survive in order to gain strength and take revenge. Gumpry was right. Ray had never studied magic and relied only on intuition, and his opponent was an expert, so there was simply no chance of winning. The City of Magicians is located upstream of the Elton River, and it is said that only magicians are allowed into that place. Gumpry took out a small bag. It was the money he had saved throughout his life. Inside was a piece of paper with his brother's name and description. Ray looked at him thoughtfully. Why trust such a sum to a stranger? He might not keep his promise. Gumpry smiled. They had met many times, and he had an idea of the boy's character. Besides, with his abilities, he would be able to reach the higher sectors. It was as if Ray had heard not him, but Niels, who had said the same thing just before his death. Perhaps this was what pushed him to his final decision. Other members of the group were supposed to appear here soon, but Ray had a condition. Let Gumpry take care of the bodies under the bridge, and only then will he really start looking for his lost brother. As soon as Gumpry nodded, Ray turned and walked away, telling them to wait for him with news. The boy ran for quite a long time to make sure he wasn't being followed. No one knows what to expect from Hector's brutal group, which never got even with him. He didn't just run away. The guy's target was old lady Viola. He dropped a coin into the storyteller's cup and asked if the story about the rainbow was true. Is it true that by finding its end you can make a wish? One day, one of the kids told him about the rainbow, and then he felt the delight that this child was experiencing. He said that a rainbow is a long, colorful ribbon that sometimes appears in the clouds after rain, like a beautifully decorated donut that has had a bite taken out of it. Then Ray didn't pay attention to the fact that the wish was coming true at the end of it, and thought about donuts, disappointing his little brother with his callousness. Viola smiled. The rainbow really does exist, but whether to make a wish or not is up to Ray. Her mana was still pure and calm, shining with an undiluted purple light. Gumpry, by the way, also mentioned a rainbow. That magician with a monocle was looking for it. He obviously wouldn't waste his energy in vain, which means they have proof of its existence. There's only one thing left to find out. Will he be able to resurrect the dead if he finds her? Viola smiled in her usual manner. They say you can make a wish and any wish will come true. However, no one knows where all the rainbows are, probably far, far away. Ray thanked the old woman and turned to leave. Finally, he again advised the woman to leave this place. The young man had somewhere to go. Niels left him a note in which he clearly indicated the place. There, a car was waiting for Ray, which he had promised to leave for him. It was a nice 4-seater sedan. It was enough to get you out of this dead place. However, the guy didn't even have time to open the car. A man in the uniform of the people from 18th Street approached him. Ray looked at him with annoyance. He thought that no one was following him, and there was no way he could waste time now. So the guy just hurried to jump into the car, hoping not to get into a fight. The man rushed towards him and managed to grab the car door, not letting it close. He screamed furiously, demanding that they open it and come outside. Ray struggled, realizing that he had used too much mana, and that his boosting magic, which allowed him to hold the door for now, was running out. So he decided to concentrate a fireball in his palm and direct it at the attacker. The beam pierced the man straight through the head, entering the center of his forehead and exiting at the back of his head. Leaving the body behind, Ray hit the gas pedal and drove away as fast as he could. Finally, finally he will get out of the 50th sector. On the way, Ray had to stop. On the way, he was also met by piles of metal and garbage, and also, like downstream, greedy crows were flying. In the trunk, there was a lot of food, water, and some other things. Niels had prepared just fine, providing his brother with everything he needed for the first time. He lit a fire and sat down next to it. There were still a few days' ride to the next sector, and he had to use his supplies wisely. Once he gets to the next sector, he will do his best to learn more about magic. So far, all he knows is that there are two types of mana. Red, which is used without any preparation, and the other, which requires mixing colors. Manipulating mana is not easy, but using certain emotions will cause some types of mana to be drawn in faster. Rage. Just thinking about it made the vessel inside Ray start to fill with red. However, he quickly lost his concentration and his emotions slipped away. Then the boy tried mixing different types of mana. They began to concentrate in his palms, but almost immediately burst like a soap bubble. Mana types that cannot mix will destroy each other, and even combining complementary colors takes a lot of mental energy. But some combinations probably work well. It's amazing how suddenly the need to understand such things arose in his life. Ray spent the night drawing different types of mana to himself and mixing them. For him, the starry sky was colored with the northern lights of magic. Tired, the young man lay down on the roof of the car. Would he ever be able to use magic more smoothly and skillfully? He needed to learn how to hold mana in his vessel, then the whole process would become more efficient. What he probably needs are rings like that magician's. Meanwhile, life was in full swing on 17th Street near the bridge. Hector's people were looking for someone. This was clearly the desire of the magician, who was impatiently demanding results, and he was clearly unhappy with how slowly the search was going. When one of the men said that, unfortunately, nothing had been found yet, he stuck his cane through the car window and told him to grab the tip. The man trembled and began to beg for a little more time. They would find everything. They had almost found it. However, the magician stated in an icy tone that he did not like people who did not understand him and could not obey simple orders. Still shaking and shedding tears, the man timidly reached out and touched the tip of his cane with his finger. A thick crust of ice crawled up my arm like lightning. A second later, the others looked in horror at the ice sculpture, frozen in motion and with a terrified expression on its face. The magician pushed the sculpture with his cane, causing it to stagger and fall, at risk of breaking into pieces. Useless. His death did no one any harm, the man in the monocle thought. Suddenly, another worker approached the mage. He found traces of a struggle as well as what looked like part of a golem. The mage looked thoughtfully at the furrow in the ground. He felt traces of mana. Magic had clearly been used here, the remnants of which hung in the air. In one place, its concentration was greater. The employee mumbled that people actually lived there. Street children, nothing special. Tramps? Yes, that's right. They probably left when the war started to save themselves. The man bared his teeth. Can tramps really use magic? What nonsense! He burst out laughing. Well, yes, of course, the tramp had found one of the few working combinations of elemental magic on his own. From an incredible number of possible combinations, he had chosen the one that could hit the golem? That couldn't be. He turned away from the worker and headed for the car. There must have been another mage here. Let them find out what happened and report to him immediately. However, if the impossible had become possible, the magician thought, then this mysterious child could be a genius whose destiny was to become an archmage that this world had never seen before. Finally, Ray reached the 49th sector, which seemed simply enormous. He remembered how he once sat in a diner with Niels and listened to his stories. Niels's homeland was the 42nd sector, and there, according to him, there was complete chaos, except on a larger scale. The buildings were taller and there were more streets. All the lower sectors are similar to each other. The higher you go, the more noticeable the changes. And here is Ray on the threshold of the 49th sector, which already seems enormous. What is upstream? Strange. The same piles of garbage and hungry children, but no golems. Can they really only be found in the 50th sector? Almost immediately, he came across a sign that marked the beginning of 36th Street. This meant that there were at least twice as many of them here as in the 50th sector. It was necessary to find information about the magician and the rings encircling his vessel as soon as possible. This should be the key to revenge. It was also necessary to look for information about the colors of mana, and it would be nice to get some money. It was unknown how long what Gampri gave would last. At some point, Ray emerged from his reverie and his eyes immediately fell on the store sign. Veronica's bookstore? Veronica sounds like a name. But what is a bookstore? Ray will remember how Niels taught him to read by drawing in the sand with a stick. But he had never seen a book and didn't know what it was. So the huge space filled with small squares puzzled Ray. Then a scream came from above. The red-haired girl looked out of the window, accusing Ray of breaking the window. She was obviously terribly angry and tried to drive him away with all her might. The girl said that he was stealing from a book. Books. That's what those little squares are called, right? The vessel in the girl's chest was filled with a variety of colors. Red, excitement, yellow, joy, blue, discomfort, dark green, irritation. How can a person experience so many emotions at once? She kept shouting that the adults were already coming down and would deal with Ray, so he better get out of here while he was still alive. This was all deeply incomprehensible to Ray, so he shrugged his shoulders and called her strange, which made the girl completely lose her temper. However, he didn't have time, so his intentions coincided with her desires and he simply walked away. The young man couldn't help but notice that a group of unfriendly guys were looking at him warily. He was a stranger on this street. No wonder they were surprised by his appearance and felt hostility. They would probably even consider him a provocateur. Yes, everything here is the same as in the 50th sector. By nightfall, Ray returned to the car and lay down inside. He walked through many streets, but still found nothing about magic. Those boys also got to his car and clearly had no good plans. Ray heard them, moreover. He was expecting them. He knew that there were 3 of them, and that he should expect an attack. The guys crept up to the car and whispered about what to do next. It was decided not to kill, but to immobilize and take the car keys. However, before they could do anything, Ray leaned out of the window and punched the most zealous one right in the face. The next blow landed on another opponent in the chest. He didn't have time to dodge, shocked by this turn of events. The next guy tried to jump on top, attacking not with his bare hands but with an iron pipe. But Ray calmly intercepted it and, using it as a lever, threw the enemy to the ground. He spun a small bag of stones that he used as a sling and told him to clench his teeth, clearly intending to knock them out. So all 3 were kneeling before him, badly beaten. He asked how many streets their group claimed. No one wanted to answer, so Ray threw another couple of punches, causing one of the guys to whine in fear that it was only 3. His vessel was a mixture of anxiety, doubt, fear. He walked. Ray hit his fingers with his fist, risking breaking everything, and ordered him to tell the truth. He didn't need the boys to apologize or feel remorse. He needed information, and the sooner the better. The young man sitting in the middle was chosen as the second victim. He immediately confessed that there were 52 people in their group, and they controlled 14 streets. Their leader is Kedrick. Their base is an abandoned factory. 14 streets? A lot, thought Ray. But this Kedrick's orders were trivial. Beat the alien to death and take his food. The gang boss also said that he saw everything. But while Ray was beating the information out of these 3, a 4th one snuck up on him from behind. He jumped up and attacked with a scream, aiming the knife at the throat. Maga surrounded Ray, raising a wind, throwing the attacker back like a feather. Dust flew into the boy's eyes, and the one who had snuck up behind got stones. He fell to the ground, covering his mouth with his hand, from which blood was flowing. Ray pulled him by the scruff of the neck and told him to tell the boss that he wasn't the only one seeing everything. That was the end of that day. The next morning, Ray went to the city again. He found out that the people in this sector also knew nothing about magic, and the books were just stacks of paper covered with information. Suddenly, 3 guys about his age blocked his path and asked him to follow them. They didn't come to fight, even though they were members of the same group that attacked Ray yesterday. They knew it was Ray who had beaten those 4 to a pulp yesterday, and the boss had liked it. He had even passed on a note. All 3 stared at the piece of paper, realizing that they had been too hasty with their pathos. None of them could read. Ray snatched the note from them. The boys were amazed. He could read too? Isn't he from the streets? How did he learn to read? Only 2 people in their organization had that skill. Kedrick promised in the note that if Ray came to work for him, he would never need food. But instead of discussing this with the boys, Ray asked how their group chose a leader. It turned out that the boss was chosen through fights. This answer was satisfactory enough for Ray to order him to be brought to Kedrick immediately. They reached the abandoned factory quickly. The huge gates looked impenetrable. But then they swung open, and Ray was met by a multitude of guys about his age, 2 chairs, and a fire. In one of the chairs sat a young man who seemed very confident. He stood up and came over to greet the guest. There was a ring on his hand. It would have been fine, but it was oozing mana. Before, Ray had only seen trash carrying the remnants of energy. Moreover, there was a lot of mana. It swirled around the ring and spread through the air. Ray was offered to sit in a chair because he was invited as a guest, and a guest is not supposed to stand. Ray sat down, clearly feeling how right behind the back of the chair there was a wall of human bodies. Older and younger than him, young guys hung over him, showing that the guest should remember who is the boss here. And Kedrick did a good job of proving his dominance. So young, but already with such good leadership qualities. Ray said that he had come here from the 50th sector. This surprised both the leader and everyone else. Surprised sighs ran through the crowd. People muttered that the 50th sector was damn far away, and no one had ever come up from there before, although there had been people who had gone down to the lower sectors. Kedrick raised his hand, and everyone instantly fell silent. He leaned forward. If so, then Ray would be perfect for joining their organization. More precisely, they promised the prospect of joining the Red Mercenaries organization, which was located in Sector 45. They would be able to join it as soon as they had recruited 66 members. It was a good chance to raise his status, and Kedrick already thought that Ray agreed. However, he had his own plans. Ray fearlessly declared that he refused to work for someone weaker than himself. Kedrick felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Did that boy just say he was stronger? Ray explained indifferently. In the 50th sector, they chose a leader based on strength, not on the ability to talk. One of the members of the organization rushed towards him, wanting to stand up for his boss, but the hand with the ring grabbed him right by the neck. Kedrick lifted him off the ground, risking breaking his hyoid bone. His face was scary to look at. He did warn me that he hated being interrupted, didn't he? Ray looked at the mana streams enveloping Kedrick. Enhancement magic? But it doesn't look like the leader himself uses it. Mana is emitted from the ring, Ray asked with a bored look when it would end. It turned out there was no foreseeable end in sight. He thought he wasn't going to waste his time here. Why not try to break this ring? Ray moved his hand, and suddenly all the mana seemed to obediently retract back into the ring, causing Kedrick to drop the guy and stare at his hand in surprise. He smiled to save face and said that he had probably lost his temper a little, but that everything was fine now. It was time to get back to the conversation about who was stronger, wasn't it? Ray said it straight out. He was stronger. The guy dodged the table that was flying at his head as if it were a soft toy. Kedrick was furious. The red aura flared around him again, generously emanating from the ring. At that moment, Ray concluded that just as emotions affect internal mana, they also affect the ring. Moreover, it seems that Kedrick did not know what the ring was doing to him. In any case, he offered to find out who of them was really stronger. He was all for it. They would decide who should take the leadership position, and if the previous leader won, then his group would have a new member. The date was set for a week later. Not only Kedrick's people were to come, but also members of other groups. And if Ray wins, he will definitely receive information about where Kedrick got this ring from, which is much more important than the role of leader. The next day, Ray was still wondering what kind of ring it was and how it worked. All of a sudden, he had to catch a heavy stone flying at his head from behind his back. It was a crowd of boys. They were both surprised that Ray had caught the stone and unhappy that he was walking on someone else's territory. They surrounded him and advised him not to move. They have people everywhere here. He won't get far. Not listening to their stupid claims, Ray offered to fight right here and now, with anyone who wanted to join the fight. And not in vain. The victory was quick and painless for him. In fact, they were not the first to try to attack. It seems that rumors of a fight with Kedrick spread around the area. And while his group left Ray alone as agreed, the other groups were none of their business and didn't want to let a stranger roam their streets. In fact, everything was going according to plan. The more Ray called upon magic, the better he could control it. But it turned out that he was no longer alone on the street. Someone was watching Ray, and he knew it very well. A man in a cap and large round glasses appeared from around the corner. He stepped forward and addressed Ray, calling him Hunter. The guy thought that this man was still just a child, and weak at that, and was wandering around here alone. Strange. Without waiting for any comments, he told the boy to take off his glasses so as not to hurt himself on them when he hit him. He waved his hands in fear, refusing to fight, and Ray stopped in bewilderment. Why then? The boy said that he was no fighter at all. Who would get into a fight with a body as weak as his? He introduced himself as Philip and said that he had a proposal for the gentleman Hunter. He confidently led Ray through the piles of rubbish, as if through a maze. Philip said that everyone here has known Ray for a long time and knows him as a hunter who is best not to cross paths with. They came to a building with a small gate and several floors, light against the background of other houses. Inside, it turned out to be full of people, like ants in an anthill, running around the floors and calling out to each other. The place was called Philip's Hotel, and this skinny boy was its owner. If you count those working outside, there were a total of 186 people here, and they all had something in common. They were all either too young or too small and fragile to join another group. Philip explained. In the 49th sector, there are a lot of mines. A lot of adults die, so there is a lot of work left. They are happy to hire even children. And Philip took advantage of the situation and made arrangements with several groups that he would send them workers if needed. He was a sort of buckram and even provided a roof over the heads of his workers. He created such an infrastructure himself, amazing. Then a boy, Jonathan, ran up. He said that his work at the restaurant was going well and handed Philip the money for this month. He took out a notebook and wrote it down. Ray's intent gaze at the notebook even scared the boy a little, but he offered to look at the hotel management notebook, even though he thought Ray wouldn't understand anything. But he found notes about himself, and quite correct ones at that. Philip was confused, but more amazed that someone like Ray could read. He explained that he liked to observe people, and that was the reason he had these recordings. Ray chuckled. The exact opposite of him. He himself did not understand anything about people, even when he tried. Philip apologized, even though Ray didn't feel the need to, and led him to two young men. He happily announced that he had fulfilled his promise and brought the hunter to visit. The house inside turned out to be large and bright. Ray had never seen anything like it before. Philip opened the safe to remove Jonathan's board. There were a lot of these little bags in there. The guy thought that he didn't look like his peer at all. He looked small, but he was already running a business. So what did he want to offer? Philip clenched his fists nervously. The hunter still scared him a little. But he had to overcome his fear if he wanted to stay in the black. The guy extended his hand and sincerely offered to become his business partner once he beat up Kedrick and became the new leader of the group. Surprisingly, there is less black mana in him now than before. He was afraid of Ray, but he gained courage. But what Philip was not afraid of was the defeat of the visiting magician. He believed that his chances of winning were extremely high. It was something between a premonition and objective conclusions he had made while observing Ray. He learned a lot about the hunter. For example, when he speaks, he does not look people in the eye, but looks down at his chest. Philip wanted to go further and change the subject, but Ray interrupted him. Is there anything else this guy found out about him? He hovered over him, demanding to know what other habits of his had been noticed and how many there were. He nervously adjusted his glasses and began to speak. For example, he always steps on his right foot when coming out from behind a corner. Perhaps this is due to a subconscious readiness for a possible encounter with an enemy. Philip continued. It was the first time Ray had heard such a detailed analysis. Usually people limited themselves to saying that he was strange, scary, not like them. Until now, he had to concentrate to feel anything other than rage and anger. Philip seemed to be some kind of key to his future emotional growth. Meanwhile, the guy continued. Ray, unlike Kedrick, does not give in to emotions in fights, but calculates the enemy's movements. That's why he thinks that the visiting magician will win. Without listening to him to the end, Ray agreed. He asked him to sort out the payment issues and everything else on his own and stood up to leave. But he had one condition that could not be refused. Philip has a lot of connections here, so Ray wanted him to find something. 2 days later, he was sitting next to his car, talking to the man who was fixing his car. The guy said that, judging by the condition of the car, it could easily have crossed the desert. By the way, it seems that Philip liked Ray. He rarely sent someone as experienced as this mechanic. He asked to pass the key and nuts, and the magician simply waved his hand, sending the items to him with the help of bluish mana. He didn't notice this, and was surprised that they had been lying next to each other all this time. Ray didn't try to dissuade him. Soon the guy crawled out from under the car. It turned out that there wasn't much there, and he figured out what needed to be changed. He whispered in Ray's ear that he had secretly borrowed the used parts from the shop where he worked. While packing his things, the boy said that he didn't need any payment or gratitude because it was Philip's personal request, and without him, they would hardly have survived. He also handed Ray a note. Having finally collected all his things, the guy happily waved his hand and ran off to do his business. Then Ray asked Philip to find out information about the magicians. He promised to do it as quickly as possible. He already knew something about it. It only remained to clarify a little. Only 2 days had passed, and Ray already had a note with detailed information in his hands. Many of the records were questionable because Ray, unlike ordinary people like Philip, knew something about magic. Everything had to be double-checked. First of all, he went to the man to whom Philip attributed great physical strength. Ray crossed it out with a sigh. He's just a strong man. He doesn't have a ring around the vessel. Next on the list was a construction worker who walked under a falling pipe without batting an eye. Then the wind blew and the pipe fell right next to him. The likelihood that he will be a magician is quite high. He passed Veronica's shop again. Some boys were there discussing that the shop was closed again. Well, who will open up when they are pelted with stones every day? They weren't going to stop. This time, the stones had to be thrown to the second floor, into the living rooms. Before they could do so, the window swung open and an angry Veronica looked out. In her chest shone yellow, signifying courage and conviction, and black, fear. The boys shouted that they saw her fear and that she should stay home and keep her head down. She had a home, unlike them. So why was she upset? She shouted that the adults would be coming down now, and at that moment a stone hit the bricks next to her head. The boys claimed that everyone had known for a long time that the only adult there was a sick old man. The next stone flew into the girl's face. Ray was about to help, but suddenly something made him flinch in surprise. The girl raised her hands, and everything around was covered with streams of mana, like gusts of wind. The stone flew back. She seemed frightened and surprised by what she had done. One guy tried to calm the other and himself down. Yes, it must have been his imagination. He should try again. This time, 2 stones flew at the girl at once, and she recoiled from the window opening in horror. This time it was Ray who raised his hand, protecting her. Not only did he stop the stones, but he also raised a strong wind that surrounded the hooligans in a dusty cocoon. First, the first stone flew straight into the face of one of them. Then the second one, and also right on target. They were guaranteed to have their teeth knocked out and their noses broken. Veronica, who had been standing by the window all this time, was amazed. She ran downstairs to thank Ray for saving her and to apologize for mistaking him for the broken windows earlier. At the same time, they asked each other the same question, a question about the use of magic. Veronica coughed sheepishly and invited the guy to go inside so as not to talk on the threshold. Finally, she introduced herself to Ray. It turned out that this girl owned a bookstore and lived there. She bowed her head again, asking for forgiveness. She had simply never seen the hooligans' faces before. Ray waved it off. No need to thank or apologize, but he would like to look around the bookstore. Initially, he just wanted to learn more about magic, but meeting another person here who can use mana is a great success. Veronica allowed it, although the guy seemed a little strange to her. They sat down at a table where Veronica said that her grandfather, who took her and her brothers and sisters from an orphanage, taught her magic. She recoiled in horror as Ray towered over her, asking if her grandfather was a mage. Of course he was, and Veronica could even try to organize their meeting. Her grandfather was resting on the top floor. Suddenly, she reached out to him, revealing a cut on his face. Despite Ray's resistance, her palm was enveloped in white mana, and the cut healed as if by itself. He loomed over her again, surprised. How did she do it? How could she move white mana? He himself, no matter how hard he focused, could not move the white mana. It responded to confidence and determination towards the goal, and also for the sacrifice. All these emotions were far from Ray, who was incapable of feeling, although he clearly remembered how flakes of white mana, mixing with the snow, surrounded the children when they saved him. However, Veronica couldn't answer this question. She used healing magic, nothing more. What does he mean by white mana? She had never heard of the color of magic before. Niels had also said that he knew nothing about color. So mages couldn't see mana at all? Veronica said that she only knew about the elements. That's what magic was made of. She had just used the element of regeneration. There were about 20 natural elements, and if you count the additional ones, then more than 100. Ray was pleased. Today he learned something new about magic. Veronica left him to go up to the second floor and talk to her grandfather, as she promised. Meanwhile, Ray decided not to idle away his time and went to look at the books. He reached out his hand for one of them, but then remembered that they were very expensive. Touching such things with hands dirty and rough like his was probably wrong. Come to think of it, the last time he washed himself was in clean rain. He himself did not feel discomfort from the smell, but others might well have. I wonder if Veronica has a bad sense of smell or if she was just being polite. Ray looked at the table. There were some things lying there that looked like books, maybe magazines. When Veronica came downstairs, she saw that Ray was no longer at the table. She thought he had left because she had been gone for a long time, but the guy seemed to appear out of nowhere behind her. She jumped in surprise. How did he manage to sneak up so quietly? Ray asked if there were any books on magic here at all. Judging by the titles, no. Veronica didn't answer this question, but said that it wouldn't be possible to talk to her grandfather right now. He had fallen asleep again. The girl asked to come tomorrow, and Ray agreed. Veronica said to his back that it seemed that meeting his grandfather was his original goal. But why? It's simple. He's looking for the prism. Soon Ray was sitting in the cafe, studying the data provided by Philip and waiting for the man. Then a smiling boy waiter ran up with a tray. It was he who told Philip about the suspicious man. Ray shook his head. He hadn't ordered anything. It turned out to be a compliment either from the establishment or from the boy himself, Johnny. He was glad to see the hunter himself. This was a great opportunity to check how accurate the schedule he had been given was. The waiter said it was almost 100%. He had been setting his watch by this man for the past few months. At this point, the boy was called out to, and he quickly ran off to work, promising to tell him something else if Ray needed it. Ray spent an hour eating and waiting, and then he actually saw a man matching the description. In a coat and hat at 7, he comes out of the right door. It's definitely him. Moreover, there was a vessel in it, girded with rings. There could be no mistake. Ray jumped up and literally ran out into the street, thanking Johnny for the food as he ran. This man leaves the house for about an hour. You need to find everything related to magic there during this time. The door was closed, of course, but it couldn't be left like that. A way had to be found to get inside. Ray turned to the mana, and it responded surprisingly easily, flowing into the keyhole. Who would have thought that the door to the house of a suspicious magician opens so easily and freely? But it was necessary to focus on something else. On information. Ray's attention was drawn to a wastebasket filled to the brim with papers. Surely there were some, if not important, then at least some clarifying notes there. He unfolded the paper. There was something about some bright flame, about a boss, about the time that had passed since. Since when? Then, about a red stone, and also about some 66 that we had to dig under. Wait, 66? That's how many street orphans Kedrick was trying to gather into his group. Could this really be the red mercenaries he was talking about back then? Judging by the contents of the letter, he was kicked out of the organization. Suddenly, Ray clearly felt a strong aura coming from the round box on the table, not from her. There were the same stones as the one in Kedrick's ring. It's still the same mana, and the stone attracts it very smoothly. Ray wondered what would happen if he used magic with this thing. The answer was not long in coming. A blindingly bright flame burst forth on his palm. Then footsteps were heard on the stairs. Back already? But it hasn't even been 15 minutes. The man actually returned home, muttering something about a forgotten wallet and age taking its toll. He consoled himself. It turned out that Walter was calling him, and muttered that he would soon be able to return to the organization. Meanwhile, Ray stood outside the door, barely breathing. He might have thought that he would remain unnoticed, but the man who was almost out into the street suddenly looked around the door. He clearly knew that someone was hiding there. Without waiting for an attack, Ray struck first. The knife almost cut the man's throat, instead sliding across his face. Walter leaned against the wall, cursing and pressing his palm to his face. He pulled his hand away from his forehead, revealing a deep cut, and hissed that he expected a killer from the organization, not a child. Ray didn't care. His goal was to win and make the man tell everything he knew. The man's hand flashed scarlet, intercepting the blade with his bare palm. How dare he point a knife at an elder? And how long have little kids become so strong? Ray realized that this man had just focused mana into the hand that held the blade, and was not injured at all. The same one grabbed a sickle and shouted that he gave in simply because a child attacked him. But now he would definitely tear everyone to pieces. Ray just looked thoughtfully at the blade. Is this magic too? Can he do that? The guy concentrated red mana on his palm, and also managed to intercept the blade without receiving any harm. The man continued to attack, but in reality he was discouraged. After all, this was a unique magic that he had invented himself. How could this boy copy it? Ray continued to attack, deftly wielding his dagger. The man was shocked, but now at least it became clear that they had sent a killer after all. A simple thief would not have been able to fight off attacks so effectively. He leaned his hand on the floor, thinking that he had a moment's respite. But this was a great mistake. The knife immediately plunged into his palm, piercing it. Ray decided he needed to lower his voice to hide his identity when he started asking questions. He knew from experience that it was difficult to have a dialogue with such people. If he could get any information, it would be better to get rid of this man right here. Suddenly, he burst out laughing. The boss would understand his abilities if he burned his killer to ashes right here. He burst into red flames and advised to tell the boss that Walter Bloody Eye would soon return to pay his debts. Of course, if he gets out of here alive. Ray watched as the rings around the mana vessel spun at high speed, causing the mana to spread through the vessels very quickly. It was good that he had protected himself with mana. Walter rushed at him, saying that since the killer had come, it was not right to leave the enemy alive. Ray crossed his arms, forming a multicolored shield. Walter continued to insist that these pathetic attempts to defend himself would lead to nothing. How long did he plan to stand like this? Ray also understood that the defense would not last long, and he could not get closer. Suddenly, Walter's flame stopped sticking to him and rose into the air in a pillar of fire, something that Ray couldn't block, so he simply removed it. The man's initial triumph was replaced by bewilderment. What was he doing? What's happening to his fire? Why is it going out? How does he use two main types at the same time, and even the water element at once? A wave of power enveloped Walter, finally killing his flame. Ray soon left the place, very tired due to the large amount of mana he had used. Blood was persistently flowing from his nose, staining his coat and hand. This was a side effect. His body was having a hard time withstanding such a load. Valtor was very strong. The fiery power of his magic was incomparable. It's scary to imagine how strong a monocle-wearing mage would be in that case. Right now, Ray is definitely no match for him. But over time, he will definitely become stronger. If only he had known that everything would turn out this way. He would have taken not just a few stones, but all of them. The next day, Ray headed to Veronica's bookstore. She seemed very pleased to see him, and she was surprised too. Ray had changed his clothes. He had exchanged his raincoat for a white sweater. It was a necessary safety measure. It turned out that Veronica had already told her grandfather about him, about the help, and about the magic, and about the rainbow. Interested and slightly frightened children peered out from behind the door. Catching Ray's gaze, they slammed the door shut in fear. They were Veronica's younger brothers, who had also been taken from the orphanage by their grandfather. Apparently, to teach magic, the girl jumped when Ray figured it out himself. There could be no other reasons. And she learned magic from her grandfather. Grandpa Graham was waiting for them on the second floor. It was an elderly, large man with a beard and long gray hair, holding a book in his hand. He asked Veronica to leave and invited Ray to sit on a chair. He said he was very grateful for the help. It was his job to do it, but now his health is not the best. The man's mana was surrounded by 4 rings, and it shimmered red, orange, yellow, green, different shades of blue. It's very difficult to experience all these emotions at once. However, this is not mana. These colors were as if engraved on his vessel. Many emotions had left their mark, and now they were difficult to read. The old man was glad that Ray had appeared, but he did not understand why he was looking for a magician. After all, he was a magician himself. The guy couldn't even answer normally where he was from. It was too long a story. But since he needed answers, why not play a game? The winner of each round will ask the loser a question. Mana was concentrated in the old man's hand, white with gray. He said that each magic uses its own element, and when they meet, they can even create something new. Now between them, there hovers an element of support, necessary to maintain the magician's homeostasis. They are also the most difficult to maneuver, so they are used for this type of game. The old man's eyes widened in shock when Ray asked about the second element. The guy sees him, but how? Ray saw dark and light grays, similar to shades but still different. The old man laughed. He had caught so many children from orphanages who were at least somewhat capable, but this boy was doing things that ordinary magicians were not capable of. This is real talent. Ray asked again, "What is the name of the element that is behind the support element?" The old man said that he would tell only if the boy won. The rules of the game are simple. You need to pull the sphere to yourself before your opponent. It's not as easy as it may seem. He often played this game with Veronica, but it was difficult and she lost more often. To be fair, the old man suggested placing the sphere closer to the inexperienced magician. The game started, but not a second passed before it was in Grandpa's hand. This gave him the right to ask the first question. From whom did Ray learn magic? When it turned out that he had taught himself, the man was speechless. Ray wanted to know if self-taught mages were rare, since he had that expression on his face. But to do this, it was necessary to win, and the next game began.